Karen Wilkins, the self-proclaimed enforcer of her homeowners association, HOA, stormed down the neatly manicured sidewalk. Her eyes narrowed in determination. She had received a complaint about the Graysons' yard, and she was on a mission to ensure their perfect little neighborhood maintained its pristine appearance. As she approached the Grayson residence, her gaze fell upon young Tyler, the police chief's son, playing catch with his friends in the front yard. Karen's lips curled into a disapproving scowl. "Young man, what do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice laced with authority. Tyler paused mid-throw, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion. "We're just playing catch mime," he replied politely, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Well, you're making a mess of the lawn," Karen snapped, her eyes darting to the slight indentations left by their footsteps. "This is unacceptable. You're to cease this activity immediately and ensure the yard is returned into its proper condition." The boys exchanged bewildered glances, unsure of how to respond to this overzealous HOA enforcer. "But mime, we're just," Tyler began, only to be cut off by Karen's raised hand. "No excuses," she declared firmly. "I'm giving you 5 minutes to clean up this mess, or I'll be forced to take further action." Further action, Tyler thought, his mind racing. What could she possibly do? Sensing the boy's hesitation, Karen straightened her posture, her gaze hardening. "I suggest you get to work, young man. The clock is ticking." With a resigned sigh, Tyler and his friends begrudgingly began smoothing out the small divots in the grass, all the while shooting frustrated glances in Karen's direction. Satisfied with the progress, Karen nodded curtly and turned to leave, muttering under her breath about the lack of respect in her neighborhood. But as she strode away, she failed to notice the police chief's car pulling into the driveway. Police Chief Thomas Grayson stepped out of his car, his brow furrowed as he observed the scene unfolding in his front yard. He watched as his son and his friends hurriedly smoothed out the grass, clearly under the orders of some authority figure. As Karen made her way back to her car, the chief called out, "Excuse me, ma'am. May I ask what's going on here?" Karen spun around, her eyes widening as she recognized the man approaching her. "Oh, Chief Grayson. I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there," she stammered, a nervous chuckle escaping her lips. The chief's expression remained stoic as he crossed his arms over his chest. "I'd like to know why my son and his friends are being made to clean up the yard," he said, his voice calm but firm. Karen's mind raced, desperately trying to come up with a plausible explanation. "Well, you see, Chief, there was a complaint about the state of your lawn. As the HOA enforcer, it's my duty to ensure the neighborhood maintains its appearance." The chief's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "And what exactly was wrong with the lawn?" he asked, his gaze shifting to the boys, who had stopped their work and were now watching the exchange with growing unease. "Well, there were some footprints," Karen stammered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It was looking a bit disheveled, and I had to take action to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood." The chief's expression hardened, and he took a step closer to Karen. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice low and measured. "You decided to harass my son and his friends, who were simply playing a game in their own front yard because of a few footprints." Karen swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very small under the chief's imposing presence. "I was just doing my job, Chief," she tried to explain, her confidence wavering. "Your job?" The chief scoffed. "I think you've forgotten who you're dealing with here, Mrs. Wilkins. This is my neighborhood, and those are my son and his friends. I'd kindly suggest you stay away from my family and mind your own business." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat as she met the chief's stern gaze. Realizing she had made a grave mistake, she turned and hurried to her car, her face burning with embarrassment and defeat. As she sped away, the chief shook his head in disbelief, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He knew this was far from the end of his dealings with the HOA enforcer. The following day, Karen's doorbell rang, and she peered through the peephole, her brow furrowing in confusion. Standing on her doorstep were 2 police officers, their expressions stern. Swallowing hard, Karen opened the door trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "Officers, what can I do for you?" she asked, her voice slightly wavering. "Mrs. Wilkins, we've received a complaint about your conduct towards the Grayson family yesterday," the first officer stated, his tone formal and authoritative. Karen's heart sank. Asterisk, the police chief must have filed a complaint against me. Asterisk, she thought, her mind racing with possibilities of the consequences she might face. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, putting on her most innocent expression. The second officer stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Ma'am, we have reports that you confronted the Grayson boy and his friends, demanding they clean up the yard over a minor issue. Is this true?" Karen hesitated, weighing her options. She could try to deny the allegations, but the officer's stern expressions made it clear they already knew the truth. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Yes, it's true. I was simply doing my job as the HOA enforcer." The first officer shook his head. "Mrs. Wilkins, we've been instructed to issue you a formal warning. Your actions were deemed harassment and a misuse of your position. If we receive any further complaints about you harassing the Grayson family or any other residents, you will face serious consequences." Karen's eyes widened in shock. But I was just trying to maintain the integrity of our neighborhood," she protested, her voice rising in pitch. "That's not your call to make, ma'am," the second officer interrupted. "Your authority ends at the HOA's bylaws. Anything beyond that is overstepping your bounds, and we won't tolerate it." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the officers had already turned and were walking back to their patrol car. Clenching her fists in frustration, she slammed the door, her mind racing with a mixture of anger and regret. Asterisk, how dare they threaten me like this? Asterisk, she thought, her blood boiling. Asterisk, he was only doing what's best for the neighborhood. And now the police are siding with that meddlesome family. Asterisk. As the reality of the situation sank in, however, Karen's anger began to subside, replaced by a growing sense of unease. She had never anticipated such a strong reaction from the police chief, and the thought of facing further consequences was unsettling. Sighing heavily, Karen sank into her chair, her head in her hands. Asterisk, what have I done? Asterisk, she wondered, her once unwavering confidence now shaken to the core. Over the next few days, Karen found it increasingly difficult to focus on her day-to-day activities. The encounter with the police officers weighed heavily on her mind, and she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had made a grave mistake in her confrontation with the Grayson family. As she sat at her kitchen table, staring absently at her morning coffee, a seed of resentment began to take root. Asterisk, how dare they treat me like some common criminal? Asterisk, she thought, bitterness seeping into her internal monologue. Asterisk, he was only doing what's best for the neighborhood, and now I'm the one facing consequences. Asterisk. Suddenly, a glimmer of determination flickered in her eyes. Asterisk, no, I won't stand for this. I'm the HOA enforcer, and I have a responsibility to maintain order in this community. If the Graysons think they can just waltz in and undermine my authority, they've got another thing coming. Asterisk. Karen's mind raced as she plotted her next move. She knew she couldn't directly confront the Graysons again, not after the warning from the police. But there had to be another way to assert her dominance and regain control of the situation. Asterisk, perhaps I could file a formal complaint with the HOA board. Asterisk, she mused, her fingers drumming against the table. Asterisk, surely they'll see reason and back me up on this. After all, I'm only trying to uphold the rules and regulations that keep this neighborhood looking its best. Asterisk. Emboldened by her newfound resolve, Karen quickly retrieved her laptop and began drafting a detailed complaint, outlining the Graysons' disruptive behavior and her attempts to address the issue. She carefully crafted her argument, weaving in references to the HOA's bylaws and emphasizing the importance of maintaining the community's pristine appearance. As she read over the document, a sense of satisfaction washed over her. Asterisk, this is it. Asterisk, she thought, a small smile tugging the corners of her lips. Asterisk, once the HOA board sees this, they'll have no choice but to take action against the Graysons. This time I'll have the law on my side. Asterisk. Pressing the send button with a flourish, Karen leaned back in her chair, her posture proudly erect. Asterisk, it's time to put those upstarts in their place. Asterisk, she thought, her eyes narrowing with determination. Asterisk, this neighborhood will learn to respect me and my authority, one way or another. Asterisk. The following week, Karen nervously fidgeted in her seat as the HOA board members gathered around the conference table. She had spent the past few days meticulously preparing her case against the Graysons, and she was determined to come out on top. As the meeting commenced, the board president, Mrs. Simmons, acknowledged Karen's complaint. Mrs. Wilkins, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Can you please summarize the events you outlined in your letter? Karen cleared her throat, mentally reviewing her talking points. Certainly, Mrs. Simmons. As you know, I'm the HOA enforcer, tasked with ensuring our neighborhood maintains its high standards of appearance and cleanliness. Recently, I encountered the Grayson boy and his friends playing in the front yard, causing significant damage to the lawn. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the board members. I politely asked them to cease the activity and clean up the mess, as per our HOA bylaws. However, rather than complying, they became confrontational and disrespectful. Worse still, when I reported the incident to the police chief, he responded by filing a complaint against me, accusing me of harassment. Karen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. This is a clear abuse of power and an undermining of my authority as the HOA enforcer. I believe the Graysons are intentionally trying to disrupt the peace and order of our community, and I'm asking the board to take appropriate action to address this issue. As Karen finished her impassioned plea, the board members exchanged thoughtful glances. Mrs. Simmons cleared her throat, her expression neutral. Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins, for bringing this to our attention. We will certainly consider your complaint and review the details thoroughly. Karen felt a surge of hope. Asterisk, funnily, they understand the severity of the situation. Asterisk, she thought. Asterisk, with the board's support, I can put the Graysons in their place once and for all. Asterisk. However, Mrs. Simmons continued, before we make any decisions, I think it's only fair that we hear from the Grayson family as well. They deserve the opportunity to present their side of the story. Karen's heart sank. Asterisk, what? No, this can't be happening. Asterisk, she thought, panic rising in her chest. Asterisk, they are going to listen to those meddlesome Graysons instead of supporting me. Asterisk. As the board members nodded in agreement, Karen could feel her carefully constructed plan unraveling before her eyes. Gripping the armrests of her chair, she braced herself for the impending confrontation, her mind racing with desperate contingency plans. The tension in the room was palpable as the Grayson family entered the HOA board meeting, Chief Grayson leading the way with his wife and son in tow. Karen's gaze narrowed as she watched them take their seats, her fingers tapping anxiously against the table. Mrs. Simmons cleared her throat, her voice diplomatic. Thank you all for being here. As you know, we've received a complaint from Mrs. Wilkins regarding an incident involving your son, Tyler, and his friends. We'd like to hear your side of the story before we make any decisions. Chief Grayson nodded, his expression calm and composed. Certainly, Mrs. Simmons. As you're aware, my son and his friends were playing catch in our front yard when Mrs. Wilkins approached them and demanded they stop and clean up the yard. When my son tried to explain that they were just playing, she became confrontational and threatened further action. Karen's lips pursed as the chief continued, her eyes trained on him with unwavering intensity. I arrived home shortly after and inquired about the situation. The chief went on. When I asked Mrs. Wilkins what the problem was, she claimed there were some minor issues with the lawn, but couldn't provide a reasonable justification for her actions. I informed her that this was my property and my family, and that she had no right to harass them. The chief paused, his gaze sweeping across the board members. I'm deeply concerned about Mrs. Wilkins' abuse of power and her willingness to overstep her bounds as the HOA enforcer. My family should not have to endure such harassment in our own home. Karen's jaw clenched as she listened, her mind racing with counter-arguments. Asterisk, how dare he twist the story to make me look like the villain? Asterisk, she fumed silently. Asterisk, he was simply doing my job, and now they're making me out to be the bad guy. Asterisk. When the chief had finished, Mrs. Simmons turned to Karen. Mrs. Wilkins, do you have anything you'd like to add or clarify? Karen straightened in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, I do," she said, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. The Graysons are conveniently omitting several key details. Their son and his friends were making a mess of the lawn, and as the HOA enforcer, it was my duty to address the issue and ensure the integrity of our neighborhood. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the board members. I was simply trying to uphold the standards we all agreed to when we moved into this community. But instead of cooperating, the Graysons chose to defy my authority and file a complaint against me. Karen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I believe the Graysons are intentionally trying to undermine my position and disrupt the order of this neighborhood. And I won't stand for it. The room fell silent as the board members processed the conflicting accounts. Karen could feel the tension building, and she knew her fate was in their hands. Asterisk, this is it. Asterisk, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. Asterisk, no or never. Asterisk. The silence in the room was deafening as the HOA board members contemplated the arguments presented by both Karen and the Grayson family. Karen sat on the edge of her seat, her fingers gripping the armrests in anticipation, while the Graysons maintained a composed yet resolute demeanor. Finally, Mrs. Simmons cleared her throat, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Thank you both for sharing your perspectives on this matter. The board has deliberated, and we've come to a decision. Karen held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Asterisk, please, let them see reason. Asterisk, she silently pleaded. After carefully considering the evidence and arguments presented, the board has determined that Mrs. Wilkins overstepped her authority as the HOA enforcer in this particular incident. Mrs. Simmons announced, her voice steady and impartial. Karen's jaw dropped, and she felt a surge of indignation rising within her. Asterisk, how could they do this to me? Asterisk, she thought, her mind racing with a desperate attempt to formulate a rebuttal. The board believes that the Graysons were well within their rights to allow their son and his friends to play in their own front yard. Mrs. Simmons continued, while we understand the importance of maintaining the appearance of our neighborhood, the actions taken by Mrs. Wilkins were deemed excessive and unwarranted. Karen could feel the eyes of the other board members upon her, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and disapproval. She opened her mouth to protest, but Mrs. Simmons raised her hand, silencing her. Furthermore, the board has decided to issue Mrs. Wilkins a formal warning. Any further incidents of this nature will result in the suspension or revocation of her position as the HOA enforcer. Karen's face flushed with a mixture of humiliation and rage. Asterisk, this can't be happening. Asterisk, she screamed internally, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. Asterisk, you've dedicated years to this community, and they're just going to throw me under the bus like this. Asterisk. As the Graysons stood and expressed their gratitude to the board, Karen could barely contain her emotions. She watched, helpless and defeated, as they exited the room, leaving her to confront the consequences of her actions. In that moment, Karen realized that her quest for control had come at a heavy price. She had underestimated the Graysons and the board's willingness to side with them, and now she was facing the very real possibility of losing the power and influence she had worked so hard to maintain. As the door closed behind the Grayson family, the remaining board members turned their attention to the dejected figure of Karen Wilkins. Her usually stoic and confident demeanor had been shattered, replaced by a palpable sense of defeat and resentment. Mrs. Simmons cleared her throat, her expression a mixture of empathy and firmness. Mrs. Wilkins, I understand this is a difficult decision for you, but we believe it is the right thing to do. Your actions, while well-intentioned, crossed a line and undermined the trust and cohesion of our community. Karen remained silent, her gaze fixed on the polished conference table, refusing to meet the board's collective stare. We value your dedication to maintaining the high standards of our neighborhood, Mrs. Simmons continued, but we cannot condone the use of your position to harass or intimidate our residents. The Graysons, as well as any other homeowner in this community, deserve to be treated with respect and fairness. The other board members nodded in agreement, their expressions sullen. After a long, tense pause, Karen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I've given so much of myself to this community. I've worked tirelessly to ensure everything is kept in pristine condition, and this is how I'm repaid. She raised her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I was only trying to do what was best for all of us. The Graysons are the ones who are disrupting the order and harmony of this neighborhood. Why can't you see that? Mrs. Simmons sighed, her expression empathetic. I understand your frustration, Karen, but the board has made its decision. We hope you can learn from this experience and find a more constructive way to work with the residents, rather than against them. Karen's shoulders slumped in defeat, the realization of her mistakes finally sinking in. She had allowed her own sense of authority and pride to cloud her judgment, and in the process, she had alienated the very people she had sworn to protect. As the board members began to gather their belongings and file out of the room, Karen sat alone, her mind racing with the implications of her downfall. She knew that regaining the trust and respect of her community would be an uphill battle, but deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if it was a fight worth fighting. In the end, Karen's desire for control had led her down a path of reckless confrontation, and the consequences had been far more severe than she ever could have imagined. The once confident HOA enforcer now found herself at a crossroads, forced to confront the reality of her actions and the realization that her quest for power had come at a devastating cost.